Good morning, everybody. I hope that you are well. Please indicate if you can hear me. It's fine. Gerrit, can you hear me? All right. Okay. So welcome to this webinar, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us. My name is Amanda Olivier, and I am the online pedagogy coordinator at the Two Oceans Graduate Institute, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce an old colleague of mine, Dr. Gerrit Wissing. He is the director of the Center for Learning and Teaching and Development at the University of Witwatersrand, and he is going to talk to us about balancing synchronous and asynchronous learning interactions, as well as mastering the art of online teaching. The format that this webinar is going to take is Dr. Wissing is going to do a presentation, and then we are going to ask him questions and see if he can answer us. Anyway, so
to map out the July.
let me just mute. Anyways, apologies for that. So if you have any questions, please ask it in the chat, and then I will pose it to Dr. Wissing after his presentation. So over to you.
Hi, thank you, Amanda, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I think, as Amanda said, there's going to be a bit of a presentation, but I think that the question and answer type part of it will probably be a question and discussion. And I think there's so much collective experience in the room that it would be a pity if we don't draw on everybody's expertise. So it would be nice if it kind of turns into a discussion rather than than a Q&A session. So let me share my screen. Amanda, just let me know if you can see me.
Is it loading? Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. And I want to just do a sound check quickly. Let me do the check when I get there. So yes, I'm going to speak a little bit about balancing synchronous and asynchronous learning, and perhaps a little bit broader than that. I think I'm known to say that whenever you prefix learning with anything, you're distracting from the important bit. So if we say synchronous learning, we often distract from the learning by focusing on synchronous. So I want to talk a little bit about learning first, and then maybe to say, okay, so how does this work in different environments? So I'm going to start. I can get my screen to move just with the video. I'm going to play a snippet just so you can, and then just get feedback about whether you can hear my sound.
So I was watching my brother play this video game, and he used a cheat code. Cheat code that let his character do a...
Sorry, can you hear that?
Yes, I heard it, but it seemed to be repeating itself. There seemed to be a bit of an echo, but yeah, I heard. Thanks.
That was me. I just wanted to make sure that everybody can hear before I actually run through the whole thing.
Okay, great.
So I was watching my brother play this video game, and he used a cheat code that let his character do a walk through walls hack. He pushed himself against a barrier in the game, hit some buttons, and boom, his character appeared on the other side. Imagine if you could walk through walls in real life. And it turns out you can, at a quantum level. We're talking on a scale of the stuff that make up atoms. Strange things happen at a quantum level. For one thing, all subatomic particles, they've got split personalities. One personality is a wave and the other one's a particle, but there's still one being. When you want to know where they are, they seem like a particle. And when you want to know what they're doing, they behave like waves. But you can't ask both personalities at the same time. Basically, they've got some serious commitment issues, and that means we can only guess where they might be. Imagine an electron has 2 dice, 6 sides each. What the electron rolls is where it will sit along the line. Our electron can't commit to a position until the dice are rolled, remember? There's commitment issues. So as our electron is shaking the dice, it's everywhere at once. Something, like us trying to measure its position, has to force the electron to let go of the dice and pick a spot. Of all combinations, getting a 7 is more likely than 2 or 12. In reality, though, the electron can be in more than just 10 spots, since there are many more combinations than just 2 dice. Now we can picture subatomic particles as this, a probability wave. This wave will tell us the odds of finding a particle at that location. Say this is our electron's probability wave. The peaks of the wave is where we're most likely to find the electron, and in the valleys, it's less likely we find it there. Let's say the electron is heading towards a barrier. As it hits the barrier, the wave bounces off. But let me tell you something about waves. They are not perfect. For example, a beam of light doesn't perfectly reflect off of a surface. A small fraction of light can get through. Waves won't bounce off perfectly, so neither will the electron wave. Sometimes the wave can slip through the barrier. When the wave is in the barrier, the chances of finding an electron there goes down by a lot. But if the barrier is thin enough, the wave can reach the other side before it dies off. So what does that mean? Remember, the wave tells us how likely it is to find the electron there. This means there's a chance we can find our electron on the other side of the barrier. Or in there too. Once it's on the other side, we can say the electron tunneled through the barrier. This is quantum tunneling, and that's how subatomic particles can walk through walls. Okay, so little elementary particles can walk through walls, but I can't, because my body's made up of more than a quadrillion of these quantum objects, and the odds of all of them tunneling through the wall is practically impossible. So why does quantum tunneling even matter? It's the reason we're alive. Quantum tunneling allows nuclear fusion. Sounds familiar? That's how our sun releases huge amounts of energy that makes life on our planet possible. So how can you quantum tunnel at home? You already are. It's one of the ways our DNA mutates, among other roles that quantum physics plays in our biology. Quantum physics makes it seem like the world is playing cheat codes on us, but it isn't. It's how the universe works. Maybe the quantum world is telling us that when faced with an obstacle, there's a small chance we can defy expectations and breach barriers. So I was watching my brother play this.
Sorry, thanks. So I wanted to play that in the beginning, and you might wonder why. So you would have seen in the heading to that video that Miriam won a prize for that video, the way in which it was edited, and Tony Bates at some stage tweeted about this, and he said really what a good job a video is. And so what I wanted to do is to have that kind of in the back of your mind as we go through the discussion, and at times I'll refer back to that around what she does and how likely it is to be effective or not effective to support learning. So I want to discuss a few things just up front to make sure we understand each other, that we use the same meanings for the same words. And also just some context around, where we work, the South African higher education environment, and who our students are, and so. So I just want to quickly run through some concepts. So the first thing, in terms of different scenarios where our students find themselves. So we find that in all of our higher education institutions, that students come from diverse backgrounds. So we've got really wealthy, well-off students. They've got everything that they need in the home. They're well resourced, and then on the other end of that spectrum, we've got people staying in tin shacks, and they don't have running water, and there's like poorly lit environments, and it's like one room for the whole family. And so the challenge that we have when we design is that we've got to cater for the whole spectrum of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit later around how we can possibly do that. And it's like emergent conversation. So some of you might be able to share some of your stories as well. But so we need to design in a way that includes everybody in a meaningful learning experience. Everybody gets equal-ish access to the learning experience. Our designs need to take consideration of people's personal living circumstance, and so it's really important to understand that context as well when we design. We don't design for one student, we design for many different students who are in the same room at the same time, but they're all at different living experience, socioeconomic context, and so on. So we always need to design for the whole spectrum of that, and that's a really tricky thing to do. When I speak about hybrid, I typically speak about a scenario where there are some people in a room and some people attending online. So that combination of it's a synchronous mainly event where some people are in the room and some people are attending that same experience, but using online technology. When I speak about high flex is interpreted in many different ways. So at some institutions, what let me explain principle. So iFlex is an approach to design that takes into account personal circumstance of students, and allowing them to choose which learning pathway they're going to decide, they're going to follow, depending on what their own circumstance is. And so that might mean that there's a live session in a room, and students choose to attend the live session. There might be people who can't be in that room, so they attend the live session online. There might be people who's not available during that time slot, so they can do some stuff later on, watching a recording, gaining access to an online learning environment, and having a fully online learning experience, fully asynchronous after the time, never looking at live interactions. And so that's a fairly complex way of designing, because you've got to design for all of the possibilities in a way that the student can decide which learning pathway to follow. And in other words, the student gets to adapt the learning environment to their own personal circumstances. So different people interpret this differently. I've seen some explanations of iFlex where basically they do a hybrid session and they record it and they upload the recording to an online site, and they call that iFlex. So that is a form of iFlex, but it's not the most comprehensive form of iFlex that you can possibly imagine. When we speak about synchronous really just means the same time. So we're all in the same environment at the same time. And asynchronous means not at the same time. So we're not gaining access to the same learning experience at the same time. Some people may access it later, and so it's not kind of the same time as the live interaction has occurred. So just some examples: on-site, the synchronous event on-site would be normal teaching in a classroom. A remote synchronous event might be an online webinar, so like the one that we're having at the moment. I want to add kind of near synchronous, and my wife says she knows it as bisynchronous. I'm not too sure about that term. I haven't heard it. But near synchronous means it's not really synchronous in the sense that we're all in the same room at the same time, but it's so close to synchronous that it's almost synchronous. And if I can have an example, if you have a WhatsApp conversation with a group of students, it's not really synchronous, but it's pretty much synchronous. So I want to talk about just some examples of near synchronous. So a chat event would be near synchronous, and the discussion board can very often be near synchronous. I'm not really sure what an on-site equivalent would be. I tried to think of something and I couldn't come up with something. So if you have an example, you can put that in the chat. And then asynchronous obviously means it's not real time. It's often, it's kind of delayed. I don't want to say delayed. Let's say it's you choose your time at any point in time after the live interaction took place. So it's not a live interaction, it's kind of a canned interaction. So on-site would be, your lecturer gives you some work to go and do it up. And so that assignment is a learning experience, but it doesn't happen at the same time as the teaching takes place. And so most online sites, if they are well designed, has a huge part of asynchronous learning activities, simply meaning that students can access them at their own time, at their own convenience. They don't have to be at a specific point in a physical place at a specific point in time. Then I want to talk about two types of engagement, and this is the first time I want to refer back to the video that you just watched. So often we say that our learning interactions need to be engaging, but there's two subtle meanings that you can assign to engagement. The one is, I really enjoy this. So like when you watch a riveting movie, you're like really in there, and you can watch the whole thing for 2.5 hours, and you walk out of the movie and it was a brilliant experience, and that was engaging. but it's not engaging in the learning sense. When we speak about engagement as far as learning is concerned, we mean where students engage cognitively with the learning content. So whenever we speak about engagement that leads to good learning, that's the sense that we mean, is where students engage cognitively in a process of meaning making of the learning content. The other engagement is, it's really fun and you know, we enjoy watching movies and everything, but it's not positively correlated to learning outcomes. Whereas the engagement, the cognitive engagement with content, that's where the correlation with learning outcomes is. And then I've mentioned it earlier. I'm really not a fan of prefixing learning with anything. So I see a lot of people talking about active learning. There's no such a thing as inactive learning. Those of you who follow me on LinkedIn will know my position about that. All learning is active. Learning is an active process. Even if you just sit and you listen is an activity, and you're going to learn something from that. And to the extent that you're learning, there is some activity taking place. So I'd never talk about active learning, because active learning is, all learning is active. The same with blended and online. Whenever you use any kind of a prefix to learning, it detracts away from the important thing where we should focus on the learning. So our question should never be what is blended learning. Our question should be what is learning, and how can we aid that with technology, for argument's sake, but the focus always first on the learning. All right, so just something else. When we talk about learning, this is one man's opinion. It's not an opinion, it's a well-researched opinion. It's built on Bavier's dual channel principle, as well as got some work done on working memory. And so there's a whole lot of theoretical background in Mayer's cognitive theory for multimedia learning. Okay, sorry, just step back. I said I was going to refer back to the video. So that video that you watched is really engaging. So it drew our attention, but it's the first type of engagement. We enjoy it, but even now, if you think back what it is that you learned from it, you won't remember a lot. So you were drawn into it, but you weren't involved in the process of meaning making of what she was actually saying. And so that's something to always keep in mind. So what Mayer says is, we live in an environment that's kind of just filled with stimuli, and it's no sense. We've got all of the kind of sensory stimuli in the environment, and that's where it stays. So the process of getting information into your working memory is simply by paying attention to that stimulus. So if there's a presentation that your teacher is doing, and if you're looking at just the act of looking at it and paying attention to it, that act is what draws it into your working memory. Until you pay attention to something that doesn't get into your working memory. So the first thing you need to do is to pay attention. And by paying attention, or by sensing, as they call it, that draws information into your working memory. And there's some pre-processing that happens in your working memory then. So a really good example to use is the concept of apple. So when you have an apple in your hand and you take a bite and you chew it and you taste it and you smell the apple, all of your senses is involved in that process. And so what happens in the first bit of meaning making in your working memory is all of the sensory information gets drawn into your working memory, and it gets integrated. So you see the apple, and you know the word for this is an apple, and you can smell it and you can taste it. And next time when you think about apple, that whole integrated notion is what you remember. So the first process is just that pre-processing where you kind of create an integrated concept of this new thing that you're looking at. And the second thing that happens once you've done that is you start drawing on your frame of reference or your long-term memory, and you draw whatever you have in your long-term memory that is related to Apple, you draw that into the working memory, and there's a process that happens again. You draw this concept into part of your fixed memory structure. So in that process, you might think, okay, this is an apple. Where does it fit into what I know? Okay, it's a fruit. It grows on trees like peaches. It needs water, and then you kind of fit it into your classification system in your long-term memory. And so learning often, when the cognitive sciences define it, they define learning as a permanent change in your long-term memory structures. And so if you've gone through this whole process from sensing something, pre-processing, putting it into your long-term memory through various processes, once it's settled in your long-term memory on a permanent basis, that is what is often defined as learning. Some things about that, Mayer's cognitive theory for multimedia learning talks about classroom learning. So they talk about two senses. They talk about what you hear and what you see, because that's often all that happens in the classroom. So in that sense, the model is very limited. There's far more senses than that. The working memory is fairly small. So for the moment, the latest that we know about the working memory is that it can hold 4 memory chunks. So what I was talking about Apple just now, it can have like 4 little bits of that in your working memory. If you put the 5th one in, something else is going to go out. So when you do a learning interaction, when you design your learning interaction, that's something that you need to remember, that you've got like 4 bits of like related information that you can keep in your working memory. Then you've got to stop, and you've got to do some processing where you make meaning in terms of your frame of reference, your long-term memory structure, so that stuff can move from your working memory into your long-term memory structure, and then you can come back and work with new stuff in your working memory. All right, right at the bottom, I speak about instruction and construction. So what I'm trying to say is that instruction very often happens when somebody else decides what needs to be learned. And so you go into a classroom and there's a lecturer, and the lecturer's got a learning experience that he or she has designed. And so the point of entry of information into your working memory, the trigger for that is external. Some teacher comes and they initiate the learning experience, as opposed to knowledge construction, which often happens due to your own intrinsic reasons. So you're curious about something, and because you're curious, you then go and you find information and you make meaning of it. And so there's also a control issue when you talk about instruction. Much of the control is often with the teacher or with the presenter. But when we talk about construction, the control is very, very often with the learner. And so there's, the locus of control. It's also got an influence on the way in which you will learn. If somebody else has control over what needs to be learned, the information comes to you via presentation. If you're in control of what you want to learn, so everything that you learn outside of a classroom, the locus of control is with you. And so you then go and you draw information, you do inquiry-based learning, or that type of learning. So I see in the chat, and I'll address that as I go along. So that what happens, Karen, is that your frame of reference is very important in how speedily you can draw new information into your long-term memory structure. If you've got a wide frame of reference, it's easier for you to make connections, because there's kind of more things that you can connect it to. But if your frame of reference is very narrow, then everything that you learn, or not everything, but much of what you need to learn, needs to be settled through a process of memorization. So if you learn entirely new stuff, the process is memorization. If you relate some new information to what you already know, that's a process of meaning making. And so the more you know, the faster you can learn new things. And you might have experienced that in your own learning, as well as when you learn new stuff that's related to what you already know lots about. It's really easy to make sense of that. But if it's quantum physics, for example, it's going to take me a while to learn about quantum physics as much as I know about, I don't know, good whiskey. Okay, so I'm going to skip by this. We'll distribute the presentation later on. That is just, you know, somebody saying that your working memory can hold 3 chunks, can hold 4 chunks of information. I'm going to just talk a little bit about this video, and please watch it later. It's really interesting. So what the video does is it speaks about somebody's memory about 9/11, and she's got a vivid memory of what happened on the day, where she was sitting and you know, how the smoke drifted across her window, and like she's got this whole vivid memory of what happened on that day. And then she speaks to her mother, and her mother says, but you know, the wind was blowing in the other direction on that day. There was no smoke. Yet her memory of the event, and it's 9/11, it's a significant event, is entirely wrong. And there's something to remember, and that's part of the reason why this conversation, for example, is not a really great way to learn. It's because immediately as I tell you stuff, as we discuss stuff, your memory starts making meaning and starts reinterpreting. And, you know, so what might happen is, as I'm speaking to you, something might happen outside of this occasion. So the dog might be barking, and you might hear a car crash and something. And so what your mind does is it does reinterpreting, not just of what I'm saying, but also about what else is happening and what you've learned before, and what things I'm triggering in my conversation. And so one should be very careful to remember that your memory is not always reliable. You think you remember things the way that it happened, but in the meantime, your memory is just entirely inaccurate. And so the notion that I can sit here and talk to you about stuff, and you're going to remember it exactly as I said that, it's just not true. As much as we would like to believe it, it's just not true. Okay, so let's talk about the real elephant in the room. The question around whether we use synchronous or asynchronous and what the balance is really not a good question, because it depends. Those of you who've been in learning experience design for a long time will know that there's just too many variables in the way in which people learn for you to have to be absolutist about how you design. So you've got to take many things into consideration. The second thing that South Africans specifically need to remember is that we've got a very, very, very specific higher education context. There's a regulatory environment within which we function, and you have to work within that regulatory environment. So the first thing that we want to ask ourselves when we decide on synchronous or asynchronous is, you know, what are the outcomes? What outcomes are we trying to achieve? And bearing in mind those outcomes are the outcomes in the qualification as it was accredited by CHE. And those outcomes then, because of the regulatory environment, should have been framed with reference to level descriptors. And so the first thing that we have to do is to look at, for the module that you're developing for, what are the learning outcomes that was approved by CHE, because that's what the learning interaction needs to work towards. And the second thing, obviously, is the assessment criteria. So the first question is, once you've done all of this, what will you be able to do with this little bit of learning that we acquire, this little bit of knowledge, applied competency really that we acquire? The second thing is, how will you know that you can do that? So outcome, what will you be able to do? Assessment criteria, how will we know? And the rest of the process of design is a constructive alignment process. So we need to have a learning experience that will work towards you being able to adhere to the assessment criteria so that you can achieve the learning outcome. The second thing that I mentioned here is you have to take context into consideration. So when we design, this is working with EPSI at the moment in having fully online programs. So one of the things that we know already is the whole learning experience is going to be online. So there's some factors that you need to keep in mind when you start designing that's a given in your situation. So if you're deciding you're going to work synchronous, then it means all of the learning interactions that you design has to be designed in a way that it'll work in a synchronous environment. If you know that much of what you're going to do is going to be online, then you've got to know, okay, so you've got two options, and then you've got to start pulling apart what'll work in a synchronous mode, what works well there, what can't be done in a different way. Or you've got to think, all right, so what are the things that I can design in a way that students can do that in their own time, at their own convenience. I want to get back to our student population. We need to understand that their frames of reference are different. So that has got an impact on the way in which you scaffold learning. So, and that's true for synchronous and asynchronous, whether you teach in class or whether you teach in line. You always need to kind of bear in mind what is it that your students already know, so that you can design in a way that you can hook the new knowledges to the existing knowledge, and that's really difficult. It's really one of the really difficult things in our context, because we're so diverse. It's not like in a country like Finland, for example. Everybody's like really comes into university with a really good schooling background, and so the diversity is far narrower than it is in South Africa, and so it's easier to design for a uniform group of students than it is for a diverse group of students. Socioeconomic background is really important. Again, the correlation between academic success, or the big causal correlate to academic success is socioeconomic background. And so if you look at the recent polls, it's really interesting to look at polls in detail, because overall, our results are horrible. But if you look in different strata inside of that information, you see that at the old Model C schools, things are kind of going the way that they've always gone. Nothing's changed there. But it's on the lower socioeconomic scale of events that things are dropping really badly. And so to say that, things are all, our students can't read for comprehension as a all-encompassing statement, that's not true. It's in a certain demographic that things aren't going well, and that's got to do with socioeconomic background. It's got to do with an unresourced environment where people don't have access to internet, where they don't have books in the room, and so we need to design to compensate for that, depending on who the students in the room are. Consider resources available, consider the budget. Those are things that is just practically that'll influence the way in which you design. Just in terms of modalities, I want us also to distinguish between distant learning and learning at a distance. At WITS, when we want to go online, people say, but we're not a distance learning institution. But what we forget is that not all learning happens in the classroom. Some learning happens in the classroom, but some learning happens away from the classroom. So you've got a contact student. It's a student that is registered full-time, and they're residential, or they come onto campus on a daily basis. And some of the learning happens, some of the learning experiences are in the classroom. But most of the learning experiences are actually when students go away from the classroom and they have to start grappling with making meaning of this information. And so when we design for asynchronous learning, we've got to design in a way that takes into account that online learning experience needs to support the student when he's learning away from the classroom. So it takes a way of thinking when you design for that. And so the simple answer that I would suggest, and here's where anybody is welcome to to disagree or to add or to discuss, is, in my mind, I think the first place to design is to design for a student who will be learning asynchronously and in a self-directed fashion. The reason why I say that is firstly because you can't do that. You can't design a fully online program for self-directed learning unless you really plan well. So much of the reason why lecturers just stand up and talk in classrooms is because they don't plan for anything else. They plan to walk into the classroom and talk, and that's what happens. They don't plan an interaction with their students where the students are cognitively engaged in meaning making. I don't want to talk about active learning. I'd rather say activity-based learning, where the students are busy making meaning rather than the lecturer speaking about what it is that the students are supposed to know. So the second reason why I want to say, if you design for asynchronous learning and it's kind of a self-contained learning unit, there's nothing that stops you from using that information in a synchronous session, because you've got the whole learning interaction mapped out. It's built in the course. The resources that you need are all there. And so when you teach in classroom, you can access your online course, and you can use all of those resources as part of your synchronous offering. The opposite is not true. If you've just planned for synchronous on-site teaching and all of your resources is in your kind of in your briefcase, and you walk into the class, and so you've got all the information available, but that's of no use to students who want to learn asynchronously, because there's nothing on the website. So build online first, and then use that information in your contact sessions where it's necessary. I mentioned before, design for remote first. Second thing around designing for asynchronous learning is you have to remember that in classroom, you as a teacher are there to tell your students, how to go about the learning interactions. So you're there to guide the whole experience inside of the classroom. But if you design for asynchronous online learning, the teacher's not there when the student is learning. So your narrative, the words that you write down in your online course, that stands in the place of the lecturer. So you have to use the narrative in your online learning environment to guide the student through the learning experience in the same way as you would do in person in the classroom. So narrative and tone of voice and encouraging phrasing becomes very important when you design for online learning. A second principle that I want to suggest is that when you design the online learning experience, that you design the online learning experience for the student who needs the least support. And so you design a learning experience that the students who are going to go through the workload quickly can go straight through what they need to learn and get to the end as soon as they can, without having to go on kind of deviations that will be frustrating for them, because they're going to learn stuff that they're going to have to do things. They're going to be forced to do things that they already know. So you want to design for the students who don't need any support to get to the end as soon as possible. And then for the students who need more support, you build support into that learning experience in a way that you can demand support where you need it. So to give you the practical implication is in your learning material that you have online, you're going to have a minimum information on screen when you first look at it, but you'll have many hyperlinks on key concepts. And so when a student works through the learning materials and they get to a concept that they don't understand, they should be able to click on it, and it should open up some resource so that they can learn what they need to learn in order to enable them to carry on with their learning experience. So the student who doesn't need to access that information simply doesn't click. But if you do need information, you click on something that opens up a little micro lesson for you, you do that, and you come back and you carry on. So when I talk about on-demand scaffolding, that's what I mean by it. You don't force everybody to go through all of the learning support that you've built into your course. You build support in a way that is accessible only when you need it, by clicking on a hyperlink and so on. Why do we use Synchronous? So if you read literature around where talking is effective, or video recordings for that matter, it's actually what I'm talking about. During COVID, a lot of what we did was to record lectures and uploading that. And the recordings are as ineffective for learning as a hour and a half lecture is for learning. It simply doesn't work. It's too much information for what your working memory can deal with. So you use video recordings in your online session to show presence. So right at the beginning of your course, you have a little video and it says, "This is who I am. Welcome to the course," and to create a sense of presence, and as you move along, you might, like on a weekly basis, say, okay, so this is what you should have learned in broad terms. And so it's a mechanism for showing you're in the course with them, and you seeing what they're learning, and you seeing what their questions are, and you're addressing that in a recorded video. Rather than you trying to present information, presenting the core information that needs to be learned as a video. That's simply not effective. There are better ways than these costly ways, more accessible ways to present information. Text is something that is totally underrated for online learning. The second thing is you can use synchronous interactions for when your students want it. So there's nothing wrong with you to tell your students, listen, we're going to have an online session on Thursday afternoon at 4. But that session is it's not a me telling you stuff session. It's a me being available for you to ask me questions, and to point out some issues that you've noticed in the discussions. And the second thing where you can also use it is when you look at discussions, and I actually mentioned it just now, when you assess, when you do assessments and you see there are typical errors that you're picking up, you can organize a quick session for your students to say, let's just meet up Friday afternoon, not Friday, Wednesday morning. It's at 9 o'clock. I just need to touch on some things with you quickly. So you can come in and you can talk about a few things that just go away. But don't use the synchronous event as a information transfer event. It's not an effective way to use synchronous. So finally, as an introvert, those of you who know me will know why I'm going to say this. I don't like people. I don't like group work, and I'm not alone in that. Please, the fact that you don't ever hear people in your class saying that they don't like group work, it's not because they like group work. It's some people are just not saying that they don't like it. There are always people like me in your classroom that would rather like to learn on their own in a different way, and it's perhaps not as effective, but in order for you to to allow your students to control their own learning experience. It's a good idea always to have an asynchronous option for whatever you do synchronously. Okay, so let me stop with talking and open the floor to discussions. And you're welcome to type some questions into the chat for me. And I know Amanda also prepared 11 questions, and if she wants to, she can add some of those questions in the chat, and I can talk through that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So Nadia has changed the settings so that people can unmute and show their cameras if they want to. Otherwise, you are welcome to just add your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you want to ask a question. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to indicate, is there anyone that's got a specific question? Okay, so Prof. Karen is saying, I like the idea of a lean path for those with the necessary skills and knowledge to proceed without digressions.
I think one of the questions you sent, Amanda, dealt with how do you personalize learning support for individual learners? And so that's not a question for synchronous or asynchronous. It's just a question for, when you have 300 students in your classroom. And in my view, I think it's actually easier to do that online than it is to do it in the classroom. The classroom is a funny environment because some students will need support and they won't say it, and they will often be more likely to raise issues online because they feel a little bit more protected online than they are in the classroom. And the second thing, that the affordances of learning technologies are such that you can do individualized pathways when you design your online courses. So many of the new LMSs has that functionality specifically available that you can individualize the learning pathways. Kind of adaptive learning, I think it used to be called traditionally. And also the way I'm suggesting that you use hyperlinking, that is a way that you can help the student to kind of find their own learning pathway through the learning experience, to demand support where they need it, and if they don't need support, they can just carry on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of leads me into I'm going to rephrase one of the questions that I prepared a bit, and basically from the learning paths that you say now, that you can change it to suit or adapt it to suit a certain student. There is a perception that, especially in a distance or an online environment, that synchronous learning will encourage collaboration and a feeling of belonging amongst students. Do you think that is always the case, that if that is the only way to encourage the students to have a feeling of belonging and of being in a group together or being in the same boat? Or do you think it can be established with asynchronous learning as well?
I've got a slide. I've got a slide for that. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have seen this. Julie Salmon developed for Open University, I think at the time, a 5-stage model for facilitating online learning experiences, and she developed it for online learning. That was true, but the whole notion is that when you learn online, you don't just jump into conversation, because there's a couple of issues that will cause the conversations just not to take off if you jump directly into the learning itself. So what they say, first of all, is make sure all of your students are able to access your online course. So before you even start with the course, make sure everybody who is registered for your course knows how to log in, knows how to get through to where their course their module is, And the second thing that goes with that is that they've got some kind of a familiarity with the tools that they're going to use to learn. So if you've never used a discussion board, so now you jump into the course and straight into content, and your facilitator says, okay, post a message in the discussion board, but you don't know what a discussion board is and how to use it. So don't start with the learning stuff before you've got your students to the point where they're familiar with the technology. Start with that. The second thing you want to do is you want to create a sense of community in your learning environment before you start working with content. You want people to start feeling safe in that working environment, just to start to get to know everybody else in the course, to feel free to engage with them. So your initial activities that you have in an online course is not about the learning content. It's about the learning community. All right. So you create a sense of community first, and only once you've got a sense of community, then you can go into the learning experience. And then all of a sudden you'll see, because there's a community within which the learning takes place, the conversations takes off. And then you get to that situation where a discussion board conversation can be near synchronous. And it gets hectic if you focus on the community first and that community takes off. It gets really hectic in an online course, and the engagement levels are just off the charts. But if you miss that out, you'll find that you get people just doing what they're told to do and nothing more. There's no kind of sense of community, sense of I need to help you, and I'll feel free to ask you for help if I need it, kind of thing. That doesn't happen unless you deliberately establish it at the start. And I want to say a second thing about that is that this is not unique to online. It's exactly the same thing for your contact sessions. If your students don't know where the physical classroom is, they're not going to be in the room, so they're not going to learn. So when you facilitate synchronously in a physical space, you need to make sure that your students know where the classroom is, when the lecture will take place, what they need to have, what you're going to do in the class, how are they going to go about learning stuff. The first time that we learned about constructivist learning, Johannes Cronje told us that that's not something that comes naturally. You've actually got a plan for that, and you've got to get your students familiar with that approach to learning, because otherwise they're just not going to participate. So you've got to get your students familiar with the tools and the approaches for learning that they're going to use when they learn, before they start learning. Otherwise, when they get to that point of learning and they don't know how what you're expecting of them, then nothing happens. So you've got to do a lot of upfront work to make the later stuff work. Again, the slideshow will be available. So the next screen, sorry, there you go. So that's a little bit expanded on the 5-stage module. It says what kind of things happens in every one of the stages, and you can have a look at that. And I put the reference to Julie Salmon's website at the bottom. There's quite a lot of useful information. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you for that answer. There's quite a number of comments now. So Shantae is saying that her opinion is that modern students who are still in their youth and have had the privilege of a life integrated to technology, whether at a minute level, like television and cell phones, to more integrated systems like Siri and Alexa. How do we harness their power to consume and synthesize information into asynchronous learning and teaching methods?
So the one thing about that, Shantae, is as much as we live in an environment that is, what kind of call it, technology pervasive, students use the technology for communication and for entertainment, but not necessarily for learning. So the idea that students, because they are younger, necessarily are more familiar with learning technologies is not necessarily true. So there's some guidance that we need to give to them as well. Another thing, I perhaps want to use this as a opportunity to jump into motivational models. Now, these models are a little bit old, and they've done some work since 1986. But so Keller and Suzuki has got an ARCS model for getting students motivated for learning. And ARCS is acronym for attention, relevance, control, satisfaction. So what they're saying is when you design a learning interaction, you've got to draw the students' attention. It's got to be relevant to their frame of reference. They have to have control over their own learning. Remember that your students need control over pace, direction. If you don't give that to them, that's when they're not motivated, when they become compliant. And satisfaction. Learning is supposed to be fun, so don't take the fun out of learning. Maloney and Lepper speaks about challenge, curiosity, control, fantasy again, in the way in which you design your learning experience. Challenge your students, invoke their curiosity. Now ask a question that they want to answer for themselves, because if they want to answer the question for themselves, then they're going to lean into the learning experience. Again, control. Give them control over the learning experience, and draw on fantasy. I think those, Yolanda, if she was here, I think that's what architects get right. It's the challenge bit and the fantasy bit. My daughter's studying architecture at the moment, and so one of the current assignment that they're working on is to design an outpost on Mars. And so they've got to do the architectural design for an outpost on Mars. So it's like getting into fantasy. And so getting back to your question, Shante, if you design your learning experience, do it in a way that your students can relate to them. I think take into account what the world is that they live into, and enter your learning experience into that world. If that makes any sense. Thanks. I want to, Amanda, I want to do the test now.
Okay, all right.
I do the test.
You can do that.
Okay, so
and then there's two more comments, or 3 more comments, and then our time is almost up. But yes, you're welcome. Let's do the test.
So I've got nothing immediately after this, so I'll stay on for a while.
Okay.
So getting back to the video that we saw earlier, I said there was going to be a test on that video. So let's just see if I can make that happen. Sorry, it's just loading. Okay, you should see that now.
Yes, I can see it on my side.
So it's 3 multiple choice questions, and I'm hoping we can see the results quite soon. So each one of the questions are for 1 point. And we just want to see how much you could remember from that video, that 2.5-minute video that we showed you earlier. Okay, so we just scroll through the questions, so we just answer and then we submit when we're ready. Yes, please. So just give me a thumbs up if you're done. Just I want to see when most of the people are done, so I can close it down. So this is an experiment that I'm trying. I've never done this in this presentation before. So I've got a theory about that the initial video is actually useless for learning, and I'm trying to prove that. And I'm hoping that you don't prove me wrong. Pam says you forgot the option, no idea. Can't really see what's new results. See if you can view the results. David, is your hand up or are you done? Okay.
I'm done. It was a guesstimate.
Export results. I'm not too sure though how to, in the end, we've had 12 responses. If we're going to be able to share the responses on screen. Yeah, I can't end it on my side. So
So it seems like the results are question by question. So
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm not seeing more responses coming, so I'm going to close it. And then I just want to see question 1. The correct answer for question 1, if I remember correctly, was A. So 25% got that right. I think the correct answer, sorry, let me just get that document. It's not helpful. So the second question, what is the name of the phenomenon where subatomic atomic particles can affect each other even when they are separated by a large distance? B is the correct answer. And for this one, for the third one, C is the answer, wave function collapse. And so you would have seen that the results are not kind of overwhelming. And the point that I want to make around that video specifically and direct instruction as in general, simply that it is not very effective for changing long-term memory structures. You know, so you saw that presentation 40, 50 minutes ago, and already you can't really remember a lot. And that's for a number of reasons. The first thing is too information dense. Second thing, the presentation is really funky and everything, but it's too fast. It doesn't give people time to reflect and think and make meaning. The third thing that happens is she's got these odd little things that she builds in. It's a little distracting comment. If you read Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning, that's terrible. That actually detracts from learning. So that's why when you have a learning experience online, get to the point as fast as you can, because all of the deviations taxes your working memory. And so if you allow a student to go on all kinds of explorations, it overloads your working memory with stuff that's not relevant with what needs to be learned. So that's just, you know, off the top of my head, 3 reasons why that video is not a good video for instruction, and why we're not doing terribly well in the quiz. Amanda, I don't know if you want to kind of formally close off, and then I'll stay on, and we can carry on chatting.
Yes, let's do that. Yes, because we are 4 minutes over time, and we just want to be cognizant of everyone's time, respectful. So I'm going to close the formal session now, and then Dr. Wissing will stay on a bit afterwards for further questions and comments. So thank you very much for your time, Gerrit. It was really very insightful. The Two Oceans WhatsApp group are just on fire, where everybody's saying how much they appreciate the information. I will forward some of those comments to you. And then thank you so much for joining us, everybody. And then this will then be the closing of the formal session. I'm not going to stop the recording so that people can still listen afterwards for people who couldn't formally join us. So thank you very much, Gerrit.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's actually, I don't do this enough anymore, so it's always nice when I.
That's great. So I'm just going to go back to the question. I lost my place now. And was Prof. Karen that said, I heard you loud and clear about not liking collaborative learning experiences. But one of the skills that needs to be taught is collaboration. So how do you do that, taking into consideration that we'll have learners who don't like this? If we personalize learning, then should we offer these learners a different type of learning experience when others are doing a collaborative activity? It goes outside today's topic, I know. So it's about personal learning pathways.
Karen, yeah, so the short answer is if your students have the control over their own learning experience, based direction, place, then you should offer them different pathways. and please understand me, as much as I don't like collaborative learning experience, I'll be the first to acknowledge that they are really, really valuable in improving the, I also want to say, the complexity of the construct. So if you've got a social learning engagement and everybody's contributing richly to that conversation. Sorry, can I just pick up the phone quickly and I'll be right back. Sorry, it's really unprofessional, but I've got somebody to that needs to access the gate.
Okay, so while Gerrit is quickly busy there, I'm just going to, so I see that Shamil has got a question, and then I see there is a comment from Stephanie. Yeah, so those are the two comments that are left, or two questions. So if there's anyone else that's got a question, would you please put that in the chat? Yeah, and just to carry on with what Gerrit was, Gerrit's back. Are you back?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example again, an example of Prof. Johannes Grenier, actually, how he dealt with me in our master's program. Is he would let everybody else work in groups, and he would give me an individual assignment. And you know, for the most part, and then every now and again he would just say, no, sorry, not this time. This time you're going to work in a group. But so the question to answer really, Corin, is will the student be able to achieve the learning outcome if he or she works on their own? And if that's possible, provide them with a route. If the learning outcome can't be achieved if you work on your own, then obviously, you know, there has to be a group assignment. So that should always be your guiding principle when you design is what are the outcomes that needs to be achieved, you know, and how will it be measured, and can that be done in a different way? And if it can, then provide a different pathway. The second thing around that, we're talking about complexity in design here, in extremely complex designs. And so don't ever try to do everything, get it right first time, because it's not going to happen. The first time that you design your course, it's not going to be perfect. So don't even go for that. Go for Pareto principle. 20% of the effort, 80% of the learning effect. And then as you move along, you build into your course, you provide different pathways, you add different resources. So, you know, do it as good as you can for the first run, and then keep on improving it. And by the third, fourth, fifth run of your course, it will be a really good, well-supported course, and it'll have all the different pathways, I think.
Thank you for that answer, Gerrit. And I also might mention to Gerrit the other day that I usually feel comfortable the third time I run an online or a course. The first time you kind of try your best, the second time you fixed the mistakes of the first time, and then the third time you kind of start feeling in control. I'm going to go over to Shamil's question or comment. So Shamil is saying, since most learning occurs in the working memory and is time limited to 20 to 30 seconds and links with sensory and long-term memory, how can we stimulate the working memory more in online learning?
Sorry, let me just read that question carefully.
This was an example of reading it too fast.
So, I mean, the principle is just that when you design, don't design in terms of time. So I somewhere in the presentation, I've got a link to a study that Guo did on edX courses, and I don't know, sorry about that. No, it wasn't there. Sorry, I can't get it to it now. So what he did is he looked at courses on edX, and they timed how long it takes a student to drop into a video, watch it, and go away. How long it takes, you know, how long people will stick with a video. And he found that 6 minutes is the ultimate time. After 6 minutes, people will go away. So a video up to 6 minutes long is effective. So that study is deeply, 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 deeply flawed because it doesn't relate his study to what the students actually learn in the process. So there's no correlation that it draws between time on task and actual learning. Also, he talks about the wrong kind of engagement. The length of a video or the length of a learning interaction is not measured in time. It's measured in memory chunks. So that's how you structure your online course, Shamil, if I can try and answer it in that way, is every time that you've got 4 things in a, 4 concepts in a student's working memory, stop and provide opportunity for engaging, for meaning making. So you present 4 chunks of memory memory information, and then you stop, and then you go into a learning interaction where the students have got to do something with what's in their memory. So you explain a principle, and then you say, okay, go and build something for me based on this principle. And online, fortunately, you're not stuck with a 1 hour period, and after that you've got to be out of the classroom. So you can allow students more time. You can give them more. Well, you can allow them to work through the learning interactions at their own pace. And so there's no kind of real end time to a period. But so break your learning content into kind of 4 chunks bits, and then 4 chunks learning interaction, 4 chunks knowledge construction, like that. If that makes any sense. The other thing I don't like about group work is that different people work at different paces. So when you're working in the same group, you're always going to find that some people get through the meaning making faster than others, but you're working in the same group. So it's for me, that's a frustration because I'm really quick. Just not really, just joking. But so it's difficult to construct groups where the learning is optimal and not frustrating for some. And I just don't like groups. But please don't not do group work, because I don't like group work. They are really valuable for joint knowledge construction. You've got different perspectives coming into that conversation, so that the construct in the end is really rich. But I just don't enjoy them.
Thank you for that answer, Gerrit. I'm going to go over to Stephanie. She's asking, for contact learning, would you recommend also designing for the students who need least support? And if so, can you provide an example of how demand scaffolding can then be integrated in a contact session?
So, I mean, that's the challenge of contact session. If you don't have a small group of students, it's really difficult to pay individual attention to students. If you've got 300 students and everybody's got a question, how do you answer that in the period? But in online, when you use the technology that is available, you can do that. And so hyperlinking is a really good way of doing that. I'm gonna yeah. So, but remember, Stephanie, that with WITS anyway, I don't know where you are, whether you've got a learning management system. So do a combination. So what you can do is in the classroom, you do overviews, and then you refer to the online environment for the rest of the learning experience. Remember, we often think that our students are lost without us, but that's not true. It's really not true. Our students can work on their own if you support them appropriately. So you can use the technology really well to support students, but don't rely on your on-site contact sessions for everything, because that's only a part of the notional hours in your qualification. It's a small part of the notional hours in your qualification. And the meaning making doesn't happen in the classroom. Stuff goes too fast in the classroom. You always have students going back and then figuring out stuff on their own or with their friends and so on. So use your online platform to support that away from the classroom type of learning that happens. attends a lecture and then 3 weeks later goes into exam and they write and they do well, or they do an assessment and they do well. Everybody goes away and they make meaning and they prepare for an assessment, then they come back to the assessment. So the learning happens outside of the classroom, doesn't happen in the classroom. So that learning you can support in your online platform.
Thank you for that. There's about 2 more comments it seems, but the one from Alex links to the one about the bigger classes. So how effective is collaborative learning in a group of 90 students? And I think, Alex, you want to say something?
Yes, I've changed that. I say ignore my question. I presume the answer will be to build the group into smaller groups. Obviously, I'm just like Gerrit and I don't like collaborative learning. But so we'll just end it there. Thank you, Gerrit.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay. All right. So then with that, Lauren is asking, when using a video, we add captions or have a question break in between so the students engage with small chunks and we scaffold. Yeah.
Just remember with captions, make your captions, so that you can toggle them on and off, because your mind can't focus on 2 types of verbal input at the same time. So if you've got captions while somebody's speaking, it doesn't work well for learning, because your mind can't pay attention to both streams of learning. So that actually really detracts from learning. But when you have somebody who can't hear, that person can switch on the captions and on screen captions, but you have to be able to toggle it on and off.
Yeah, so then I think that is it for now, Gerrit. Thank you very much. Yeah, so there's a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you for that, everybody, and thank you for participating. And yes, thanks again, Gerrit. And we hope to do this again soon.
Thank you. It was good fun. Thanks for everybody who took the time to attend and to converse with me. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.